development. And once a month, we have a podcast. We want to have conversations. We want clergy to engage in conversations about things that they might not normally talk about. Tonight, we're going to talk about and kind of meld two issues. The need for healthcare screening for everybody, but especially for Black men, and the fact that if you need healthcare and you're a clergy person, you might not have it, which kind of seems like something that's not right and not fair because you're doing work for the Lord and you're trying to reach out and minister to people, but your congregation cannot afford to give you health care, but you get sick, you have issues and you need health care. There are a lot of reasons for this situation. According to statistics, about 60% of pastors, 60%, 60, don't receive health insurance from their churches. Black men are dying from prostate cancer, and they're dying at a younger and younger age, and some in their 40s. And a more virulent form of prostate cancer is actually showing up in Black men. And in spite of that, when it comes to men seeking healthcare, even if they have health insurance, there's often a reluctance to seek it. I call that machoism, but maybe that's not the right word, so I don't know. Our guests tonight, and I want to thank them, are Chris Wells. He is a digital marketer and a brand strategist and the founder of Epic Concepts Incorporated, who has a story to tell about his own health journey. The Reverend Dr. William Lee, who is currently serving as a senior associate pastor of East Friendship Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., and Reverend Victoria Burson, a preacher, teacher, and leader who serves within the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. We know that as TFAM, and is also the host of a talk show called Leadership on the Go, who is actually now fighting cancer for a third time, and who has had experience in the difficulty of getting health insurance. I had my own experience when I was a pastor of not having health care for a while, and I had a daughter who had asthma. And so it was a very difficult and scary situation. It is very, very, very difficult. And a lot of pastors are in that situation. So we think it's important to talk about it. And it was actually Chris that talked about how we should maybe talk about this now because the movie Wakanda Forever is out. And we all know that Chadwick Boseman, fought a very valiant fight against colon cancer. So it's a good time to talk about it. If you haven't seen that movie, you will see his face, you will see him referenced, and you can't help but think about how he had this awful cancer while he was doing this magnificent movie called Black Panther. So we thought that it was time. We didn't. Chris did, and I took his lead, and we thought that it would be a good time to talk about it. So we hope that, when you leave this conversation, you will have something seared in your spirit, about the necessity of taking care of yourself, even when it seems like you can't afford it. It's almost like we can't afford not to afford it. And so I'm hoping that something will be seared in your spirit to follow up on the need to take care of yourself. And we hope also that you will leave with some information that you can use to get healthcare if you do not have it. So we say, welcome, welcome, and welcome. So we're going to have an open conversation, and I'm going to ask that we begin by each of our guests telling you guys a little bit more about themselves, and we'll start with Chris.
Good evening, everyone. So as Reverend Sue mentioned, I do have a personal story to share just in terms of my experience as a Black man in healthcare. I spent the majority of my 20s and 30s kind of feeling that I was invincible. I didn't see a doctor. I didn't have a regular doctor. I just felt like there was no need for me to go to a doctor. And so pretty much throughout my 20s and 30s, I never really had regular checkups or had a personal physician. And around the time I turned 40, actually, it was my boss who asked me, had I had a checkup? She's like, you're turning 40. Have you gone to just check yourself out and make sure everything's okay? And so it was the first time I had gone to visit a physician. And when I walked in, I was feeling completely fine. And it turns out that I had extremely highly elevated blood pressure, so much so that I was nearing stroke category. And my physician was really shocked that I wasn't having blurred vision and headaches. And so it was really kind of an eye opener for me, just because, in your 20s and 30s, you just feel like there's no need to, especially as a Black man, that there's just no need for me to have to, submit myself to a doctor's visit every year and do those follow-up screenings and checkups, et cetera. So 40 was kind of the eye-opening age for me. And at that point, I did start to go have annual checkups, which was a good thing. And then as I approached 50, my physician started to remind me that as a man in their 50s, it was important for me to start thinking about things like prostate screenings and colon screenings. And again, just being kind of in denial and thinking that I'm this invincible, being that doesn't have to worry about healthcare and things like that, put it off for several years. And so the one thing I can say about my physician was that he was very diligent about constantly reminding me, you need to get this screening, you need to get the screening. And so as Reverend Sue mentioned, with the recent passing of Chadwick Boseman, it was something that was kind of on my mind and a thought that I needed to just go ahead and just follow through because he was so young and so vibrant and had so much life ahead of him. And if colon cancer could take him out of the game at that age, then maybe it was something that I should take more seriously. Not to mention the fact that I lost an uncle to colon cancer. So that's another point I'll address in terms of just, I think an important thing is to know your family history. But it was a combination of, kind of having my uncle's death in the back of my mind. And then also, just thinking about the loss of Chadwick Boseman. And so I finally decided to get a colon cancer screening, a colonoscopy in December of last year. And they found cancer. And it was my first time having a colonoscopy. I was obviously very shocked to find out the first time I went in for a screening, they find something, that could severely, potentially take my life. So I think all that to say, I think that as a Black man, I think I had this preconceived notion that I didn't need to think about healthcare and be proactive about my own health. And, finally taking the steps to proactively be an advocate for my own health was very important. And I think it's something that doesn't just affect Black men, but I think it's something that in our community, we need to talk about more.
That's great. And you were, as you were talking, I was saying machoism, but we'll talk about that a little bit. That whole thing about, Black men, we don't need nothing. We got this together. That gets a lot of people really sick. So thank goodness that the thought of Chadwick Boseman was and your uncle was in the back of your mind and it prompted you to do it. Thank God for that. Really thank God for that. Mm-hmm. Reverend Victoria, can you share why you're here and a little bit of your story?
I'm here because you have given me an opportunity to have that conversation. We've had that conversation a couple of times. And I have a motto that changed people, change others. Whatever opportunity I am given to help change, particularly, I'm a leadership guru and I love doing leadership development and coaching and all that. And I think a lot of leaders, just as Dr. Wells was talking about, are not true advocates of their own health, right? And so because I've gone through this journey, this cancer journey from 2012, 2020, and now 2022, it's important as a clergy woman, as one who's served as a pastor, senior pastor, elder, I just think we really need to have this discussion around healthcare, our own sickness, insurance, and the pride and anxieties around that. And so I'm an open book. I don't mind discussing me. And so I'm just glad to have this opportunity to share and hope that people will walk away blessed with this whole conversation.
That's great. Thank you so much. Reverend Lee, Dr. Lee, tell us a little bit about yourself and then kind of lead us into something I'm wondering about. What has your work shown you about the willingness or unwillingness of clergy persons, especially males, to seek medical attention? And how do you see that as related to the mental health of African-American clergy?
So my background comes from, I have a personal experience, because in 2009, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And I was in my early, very early 50s at that point. And that's considered young to be, diagnosed. But what I did not realize at that point was I had a history of prostate cancer on both sides of my family. So going back to, Chris's point of view, that it's important that we know our family history. As I was going through seminary, working on my Master's of Divinity, I became aware towards the end of my studies of the number of African-American clergy committing suicide across this nation. And it was just very alarming because we as a people, in our culture, we don't normally take our lives like that. But there it was an increasing number of us, taking our own lives. So I really became concerned about that and began to do some research on the mental health of African American clergy, and that is the area which I did my doctoral work in. And I served as a chaplain up at Johns Hopkins, for about 5 years. I did my internship there, my residency there, and worked with a program called PACE, Program of All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. And some of the things I saw working in the VA hospital as a chaplain, as well as Johns Hopkins, was the number of African-American males at such a young age who were suffering from cancer, and especially prostate cancer. And it is said that, prostate cancer is the most curable cancer. It is the slowest growing cancer. But what they're not telling us is the fact that there is a form that is more prevalent among African-American men that's more aggressive than it is among white men. So it's important that we really, check ourselves. I did not know this even when I was going through the process of working at the VA. A white female doctor educated me to that fact, and so it goes with African American women have at times have a more aggressive form of breast cancer than white women. So it's important that we pay attention to our bodies. Black men, I don't know that it partially, I have to agree with you, Dr. Smith, about part of it is machoism, but a lot of it has to do with a lot of other circumstances. Education. We are not enlightened, and we haven't been encouraged to really be enlightened about our healthcare. Healthcare accessibility to us historically has been very limited and challenging. So we need to be about going around and educating our own community. We need to be very intentional about it, because if we don't, we're going to lose so many of us. We had the highest rate of deaths during COVID. Mm-hmm. And they want to talk about it. We did have a lot of underlying, other health issues that caused us to be that way. But then we were misled, and we were fearful of even taking the vaccine. And a lot of that came out of ignorance, but it came out of fear as well. Because if you go back through and study the history of the health issues in Black and African Americans, we were often used as lab rats, yeah. As specimens, and we were misused and abused. And one thing that really shocked me was the Tuskegee, study, and it went on for 40 years. And you can't tell me folks did not know, the government did not, people in the high ups did not know. And then you go back to the Henrietta Lack, story. But and that's why we have to be intentional about knowing our history and telling our history. And because they're not going to tell us, and if you see what's happening politically in our country today, they're trying to make every effort to keep us from being enlightened about who we are and who we really are. And so I think it's we are fearful. We are a non-trusting group of people. We don't trust because on so many levels, society has shown us that they cannot be trusted, not just with the police, just not with the judicial system. We're talking about healthcare. Martin Luther King addressed that issue a long time ago, back in 1966, and he made a statement about how inhumane it was. The statement, I was looking it up today, and it says, of all forms of discrimination and inequities, injustice, and health is the most shocking and inhumane. They don't look at us as being 100% human beings.
That's so true.
And I think most of us, if not all of us, can say we have gone to a doctor or we have gone to a hospital, and we can feel like that there was some form of discrimination. I was in the hospital last week because of a condition that I have. I had to go to the emergency room, and the first day I went there, the doctor did some things. She saw me one time, and the only thing she really talked to me about was, "Where's your mask?" and I'm in a room by myself. I did that. She gave me some medicine, but it didn't rectify my issue. But then I had to come back 2 days later, but the doctor was more attentive. And at that point, I believe that we need to go on the hunt for African-American doctors and get connected to them. Because not only there are white doctors out there who don't recognize, the challenges that we have in our health, but they don't care. And they're not going to be, as intentional about making us go for testing and take it to the next level to help us out. And if I can go back to prostate cancer, there was a case that I just read the article recently that a young man, 37 years old, living in Austin, Texas, and he had just moved, he and his family, his wife and their children had just moved from Houston to Austin. And he went in search of a primary care physician, and he found a Black female doctor. And out of the blue, when he went for a physical, she said, "I want to test your prostate." And he said, "Why?" Because I'm only 37 years old. And she says, "Because I'm seeing a trend now that more and more African-American men are, contracting prostate cancer." And it turned out he had prostate cancer.
Wow.
He at 37 years old. And we think that's young, and it is young, but she was an African-American doctor and she was in tune with what was happening with her people. And so it's important that we seek out.
That is so important. One of the things you said that you just made me think when you say that we don't trust the system and we don't have reason to trust the system. All right, so we have that.
We have reason not to trust the system.
Yeah, we have reasons not to trust the system. Then we have the machoism, and then we have our own, concerns, because nobody wants to think that he or she is sick. So, even if we're kind of feeling a little lousy, a lot of times we'll just put off going to the doctor. We put it off and we put it off, and that works against us. So we have three things really that are working against us. And you reminded me when I was a nursing student before I changed my major, and they don't think that we are human. It's just like, whoa, they don't think. So we were learning how to do injections. Dr. Reverend Victoria, you appreciate this. We were learning how to do injections, and they said in the textbook, it said that you have to, use more pressure when you give African Americans injections because their skin is thicker. I said, oh, okay. So I got a navel orange, the ones with the really thick skin. And I got my practice syringe with that little water in it. And I was practicing then. I had that technique down pat because I didn't know when I was going to have an African-American, patient, and I wanted to be prepared. So lo and behold, I get the day I get an African-American patient and she needed an injection and I was ready, and it's like, almost like, in the cartoons and you see somebody getting ready to do something and then they, do something. I was like, almost like that in my spirit, because if we had this thick skin, what I really wanted was for me to be able to give her an injection to make her feel better. But as soon as I did that and I jammed that thing in there, I realized that was not true. And I was so angry. Praise God. The woman was very gracious. She was very gracious. But I had an issue with, I say all that to say that they don't think that we're human. And that might be a barrier sometimes to them doing the types of testing that we need to find out what's wrong with us. But let me lead into this. So many times we get ill, or we're going to be ill, or illness is forming, and there's no symptoms. Did you have symptoms, Chris? Did you have symptoms, any of you, that you can share? Because we don't have the symptoms, or if we have the symptoms, we don't know, we don't know what they are. Did you have symptoms, Chris?
I started to experience some weight loss,
Uh-huh.
some minor abdominal discomfort, but nothing that made me think that I needed to, have any kind of major screening or anything done. But the thing that I learned after being diagnosed was that I was also having night sweats, which is something that I never connected, but there's a high incidence of night sweats and the incidence of cancer. So all of those sort of symptoms just randomly I didn't connect the dots. So the weight loss combined with the abdominal discomfort and the night sweats, all of those things are triggers and symptoms of a potential cancer in your body. And until I spoke with my physician after being diagnosed, I never would have put those things together.
Right. Victoria, but Reverend Victoria, Dr. Lee, symptoms, did you experience any?
As I share in my journey, at some point, I experienced on different levels, different kinds of symptoms. When I was younger, though, in my family, we had heavy endowed breasts, right? Talk about that thickness and that orange, but we had heavy endowed breasts. I mean, like my aunts had, like whatever you can go up to the highest letter to make a bra was my family, seriously. And so I was heavy endowed, and I would always just ache. I would always just ache in my breasts, just ache. And so I would go, then doctors would say nothing's wrong with you. And speak about, doctors thinking that we're not human. The ER became my PCP, right? Especially out of ignorance. Most of the time, as a young Black woman, the ER was my PCP because I didn't have a PCP, didn't know that needed to have one, a main doctor. And so I would just always go when I had pain in my breast, until finally at age 25, I believe 24, 25-ish, was a young entrepreneur, and I finally went. I couldn't afford insurance, but I finally went to the ER again, and then they sent me somewhere else, and they sent me somewhere else, and they said, you need to go see this doctor. And then when I went in, they sent me to get some x-rays, and they found a lump. I didn't even know I had a lumpectomy. Talk about ignorance. I just know that they said they need to take I thought it was a cyst. Just take it out. I didn't know it was called a lumpectomy, because that led to 2012, right? And 2012 being diagnosed with breast cancer. And the thing is, I do know my medical history from my family, my immediate family, not my aunts and uncles though. And no one, some of my aunts and uncles, but no one in my family had cancer. Wow. They had high blood, they had heart issues, high cholesterol and that kind of thing. But stage 4, both my father and my brother had stage 4 heart disease, right? And so cancer was never a thing. So I believed it was what I did for a living. I was a cosmetologist for almost 30 years and an image consultant. I was around chemicals that are hidden, right? Hair colors, hair sprays, even a lot of companies a lot of the Black companies had to go back and take their hair sprays off the market. People don't know why, because it was killing the ozone layers, right? A lot of the chemicals, relaxers. Now, what do we have? What do we see on the commercials now? They're going after relaxer companies, because now they're finding women who have, for a longevity, have gotten relaxers, or even hair color, are suffering from some form of hormonal cancer, be it ovarian, uterine, breast. Now companies are getting sued. And so, really having this chemical, because I don't want to get into my industry, but when the word relax was not meant to get the hair bone straight. And so when we have that over and over and over going into our scalp, sodium hydroxide constantly going into our scalp, guanidine constantly going to our scalp, it will cause long-term effects, And as a hairstylist for almost 30 years, did not know that. Did not know that. I know the chemicals were harsh, right? But they had buffers in them. So we thought, and even the buffers are contagious. And so out of ignorance, I go have this lumpectomy, which leads me to in the 90s. And then 2012, here I am having to deal with breast cancer. And you want me to share my journey now? You want to continue with symptoms?
Let me get to Dr. Lee in the same question. I'm going to come right to your journey. Dr. Lee, symptoms.
Yes, I did have symptoms. And I had your normal symptoms, and a prostate cancer, after having the urge to urine, and then you feel like you've emptied your bladder, but then you still feel full, and so that's a normal symptom. But let me say that there are cases that you have no symptoms. That is why it's important for us to have regular checks up 20 and 30 years old. And so I want to be an advocate for that. I want to help to educate our community in that, and that's what I am about now. Helping to educate our community about the necessity to have a primary care physician, and as Reverend Victoria was saying, she used the emergency room as her thing, and that's not good. You need somebody who knows you and knows your body, and you need to on a regular basis. And I'm just very glad that Chris and Reverend Victoria were able to survive all of that,
Right.
above and beyond. But there are too many cases that they don't survive, and they're younger. They're getting younger and younger in their 20s and 30s. Prostate cancer, it's real.
It is very real. I just, thinking about how my mother died of ovarian cancer. She never had a symptom. And then one Christmas or one Thanksgiving, she got a call from a hospital, and she got physicals actually every year because she was very health conscious, and she got this x-ray. And I was actually at home and received the call from the hospital. They said, we need to talk to your mother, da, 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 da. And they had taken an x-ray. They thought she had tuberculosis. So she went to get another x-ray. And I said, no, it's not tuberculosis, but then they call it sarcoidosis. That was in November. And she came home and she said, you know what? I just don't think that that's what it is. So she went into the hospital and she, in January of the following year, and she stayed there from January through April. All the while getting sicker, the projectile vomiting and all this kind of stuff. They finally found out in April that her cancer, the primary source was her ovaries, and it had, metastasized throughout her body, and she died in May. So I think that the annual screenings are so, and we're going to talk more about that, but they're so important. And I know when it comes to prostate cancer, those screenings, well, many screenings are not comfortable, but they're not supposed to be comfortable. It's like if you take, medicine, for a cough, it's not comfortable. It doesn't taste good, but it makes you better. But people don't want to do it because they say, oh, it's uncomfortable. Yeah, but you have a choice. You can feel bad during the test, or you can die. I mean,
So you're talking about comfortability, and let me just interject something real quick about prostate cancer exam. And that's one of the main reasons that I know Black men and men do not submit to those exams. So number one, their rectums are very private. Our rectums, don't go back at it, don't look at it, don't touch it. But but a lot of doctors are not being sensitive to our feelings about that. And I know my urologist who examined me was an Asian guy, and he really didn't care about anything. But we need to make them have conversations with us. Mm-hmm. We have to insist on having conversations. And he did not, because I was new to it, and I was, kind of like, I was afraid when I got diagnosed from, it just frightened me. I didn't know what to say and what to be insistent upon, but now I do. And I will talk to any, a man to say, go in there, but have a conversation. Don't just let them touch you. Let them know, ask them, what are you going to do? And how are you going to do this? Have a conversation, but it's a necessity, and it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is.
But it's either that or ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And if you die of cancer, that's a very painful death. It's a slow and painful death.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Reverend Victoria. Would you share your story?
Sure. Let me just start with, yes, this is my third cancer. In 2012, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And, at that time, I didn't have insurance. I remember, God just works. We know that God works all things out for our good. And God just been like right next to me in every step. And I want to mention that up front. Because when I went to the emergency room and ended up finding the doctor to go to. It was the buses were going around doing screenings. And I started with a bus doing breast screening. And then that bus led me to go to see this doctor. And that doctor said, go see this specialist. And that specialist said, and finally I learned that I have breast cancer, and I don't know how I'm going to get it paid for, or I don't know the resources. I don't even know how to even begin. Out of ignorance. And so I end up going to this clinic. There's a Latino clinic, predominantly Latinos. And I end up going to this clinic, and I was referred there from LifeBridge, a LifeBridge doctor, and they sent me to the clinic. And when I went into the clinic, I went for an exam and et cetera, and to apply for grant in case I needed to have surgery. I just learned about it. I didn't know nothing about it. And I learned it from this Latino woman. There was a woman sitting behind the counter, and I didn't know her from Adam or Eve. Listen, when I tell you that God was was with me in that waiting room, I was the only Black person. Everybody else was Latina. And Miss Rodriguez was her name. She was the office personnel. She came around. She gave me a pad to fill out all my information. She said, now you fill that out and you fill everything out, every line. Don't leave nothing empty. And then she came and sat next to me. I'm like, what the hell? Oh, I'm sorry. Can I say that? I'm like, why is she sitting next to me now? Right. And so she sits next to me and she said, fill that out. Oh yeah, fill that out. Don't forget that. And so I'm like, I wish this woman would leave me alone, but it was just that she had to be there to help me fill out that application. And she said, and there were some questions there, and then she helped me answer those questions. I didn't know what those questions meant, and she told me. And so I filled it out, and she said, listen, there's grant money out there for women like you. And if you have cancer, this is what she says to me. If they have to take one, let them take both. You say I want both of them off because the grant money, $200,000 only covers one time. You're going to have an opportunity to have, surgery, and that's all they're going to cover. So if you say one and you really have cancer in both, you're out of luck. And she said, I see on here that you're a minister. And she said, we have ministers come through here all the time, cocky, won't even go to the next step because of their religion. She said, I've seen ministers and pastors die because they wouldn't answer these questions. This woman is telling me, I'm like, oh my God, why is she sitting here? But then I started realizing, the Spirit of God got this woman here. So next time I have to go in and now talk to the breast surgeon. And they had she had all my medical records and everything. And she sits down and she stares at me and she says, Dr. Sally, and she says, so what do you want to do? I said, what do you mean what I want to do? She said, we need to have a conversation. Dr. Lee, she says, we need to have a conversation. And she's a Christian. She said, I'm a devout Christian woman and I want to have a conversation with you. And so she said, what do you want to do? I said, what? She said, well, you do have cancer. You do have breast cancer. And you have to decide. The patient now has to decide. I cannot, as a doctor, decide that for you. I said, well, take both of them. I heard Mrs. Rodriguez. Take both of them. She went in, she went somewhere, she came back out with some papers. She showed me everything. She said, you made the best decision you probably could have made for yourself because you don't have a specific tumor. You have like salt and peppers all over both breasts. So I had to have a double mastectomy. But had it not been for Miss Rodriguez telling me, I don't care that you're a minister. I've seen ministers come in here and die because of their religion, because of their beliefs, because of their pride. She said, if they want one, tell them to take both. She said, you are not identified by your boobs. And this woman is saying this to me. I do not know this woman. So I knew later she was God ordained. And then God sends me to Dr. Sally, who's a Christian and wants to have a conversation and talks to me through it. God ordained. So I had a double mastectomy, and 3 weeks later, I was fine. I was in a church service with my bleeding tubes and everything, just going to revival because I was so grateful to God that there was resources. And a lot of times people don't understand that there are resources out there for us. We just got to advocate for ourselves, our own selves. And if we don't know how to do it, get some friends or people in your village to advocate for you. So 2020, I end up with cancer again. Again, this is not a history in my family. And I end up with intestinal cancer. So before I moved here from Maryland, go do 1 year clinical residency in Louisiana for chaplaincy. I don't last 4 months. So before I moved, while I was pastoring MCC Baltimore, I constantly had stomach issues. And my church was paying for insurance, a high cost insurance. I'll talk about that later, but they were paying for insurance. And when I was going back and forth to the doctors, and I was in the hospital a lot of times, and ER again with these stomach issues. And so I leave to go to this clinical program, and I'm supposed to be there for a year. It don't last 3 months. I ended up with food poison to diverticulitis to it's always been cancer. Right? Talk about symptoms. But when you go to the doctor, you expect the doctor to tell you what that symptom is. Oh, you just have food poison. You must have ate something. And I believed it because I ate a sandwich. I said, yeah, I have food poison. A week later, you got diverticulitis, right? 2 months later, you got cancer. And so 2020, I have intestinal cancer, stage 3. And then I go through that. I'm still going through that, preventative medicines, x-rays, for the 2 years afterwards. And in the midst of that, here this year, get diagnosed with cancer again. You have stage 3 ovarian cancer. Come to find out, I did not have ovarian cancer, but I have ovarian cancer surgery. Abdominal, cut me open, everything. This is medical term where the mass fell on my ovaries and made it and masked it as cancer, but I did not have ovarian cancer. So, you diagnosed with stage 4. I'm diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, incurable cancer. So I have to be an advocate, a strong advocate. There's not a curable cancer for prolonged life, however that is, right? However long God sees fit for that. And I always let people know I am not my diagnosis, right? I am not my diagnosis. So I move in the ways I would move a little slower, but I move in the ways I would move as though I don't have cancer, right? But I'm still a strong advocate. And so I had this major surgery and then told 6 weeks later, you really don't have ovarian cancer. What do you do with that, right? So, yeah, I got a free hysterectomy. Well, it wasn't free. My insurance got charged. But you know what I'm saying? I got a hysterectomy that brought on menopause and brought on other issues. But now I have this cancer that they don't know the origin, but I'm being treated for intestinal, colon, and pancreatic cancer. It's a cocktail called FOLFOX that takes care of all of those. And so this is what we're doing. This is what I'm doing right now. And and then in the midst of this, I have insurance. I'm transitioning out of a commercial insurance into medical assistance insurance. And this is where I want to tell people to advocate, because there are programs out there that you can get in your state. It may be called something else. Medical assistant, I had 2 advocates for me, Dr. Pat Spearman and Elder Dorothy Parrish Harris were 2 major advocates, 2 friends of mine who constantly push me. There got to be some kind of way you can get insurance, because I'm coming out of a divorce. I'm an open book, coming out of divorce. So that insurance is going to end. How do I get insurance when you've been diagnosed with cancer? And so I don't know. I went to Medicaid. I called Medicaid. Medicaid said you receive Social Security disability, so you have to wait 2 years before we can give you Medicaid. I called Medicare. You ain't old enough yet. I'll be almost 60. You're not old enough yet. I'm like, okay, God, what am I going to do? And so again, my 2 advocates there pushing me. There got to be something. And and finally, Elder Dorothy says, why don't you just go talk to a social worker? My pride didn't want to talk to a social worker. In the Tate Center, because the social worker is right there on the floor where everybody can see that you're going in there to, ask for her. And I went, I said, forget this. I probably had some other choice words. And I went in there and I said, I am going to go and see about this. She helped me fill out the application. She said, how much do you make Social Security disability? It's nothing but crumbs. But I tell her that, I'm just got this pride, but I have to tell her, right? And I tell her how much I'm making, and which is chump change. She fills out the application. I get approved for medical assistance. Do you know the name for medical assistance? Medicaid. I was denied Medicaid.
Yeah.
But now if I go through medical assistance program, I'm approved. So now I'm approved with the commercial and the Medicaid for the next, until the first of the year, and I don't have to pay no co-pays. We have to advocate for ourselves. I didn't want to advocate for myself. And we have to, as Black people, male and female, we have to advocate for ourselves. We have to listen to the voices in which God has placed in our lives, right? Because we're always trying to look to the hills from which cometh our help. And sometimes that help, God outsources that help through our friends in our village. And sometimes God will send people to advocate for you when you don't know how to advocate for yourself. And I'm so thankful for my village. And I'm so thankful for Dr. Spearman and Elder Dorothy Parrish Harris for just constantly staying on me. And they were grinding me and about my pride and about this, and you need to keep checking. And I finally did. And I go to the social worker. So if you can go to your local area and go to a social worker, to the hospital or major clinic, there are grants out there that will literally help you get what you need medically. So that is my story, or part of my journey right now. And I abbreviated it because it's longer than that, but I just kind of wanted to concentrate. Had it not been for Ms. Rodriguez, I don't even know if I'll be here today.
That is so powerful. That's so powerful. And I think that you, as you're talking and you're saying that we have to advocate for ourselves, I'm thinking about how important it is for people to be spiritually involved in their own healing.
Yes.
Because if your spirit is all crumped up, it affects you physically. I mean, you battling a disease, my sister, and nobody would ever know it. But I think there's something that feeds. And as you were talking, and even as you told me some of the stories before, I thought about how so many of us we have a theology that kind of kills us. It can kill us.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, God's going to fix it. Yeah, but God wants you to go to the doctor. No, I'm not going to do that because then, and my faith, I'm believing your faith, but your faith probably needs a little medicine too. It's like when you talk to Dr. Lee, when you talk about people who, I think all of us need some therapy for some, because we all carry stuff, and most of us should see a therapist and get some medication.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean that you don't believe in God. That just means that you celebrate the brilliance that God put on this earth to help us be better. But I coined that, theology that kills, when I heard you talk about this the very first time, because when that lady told you, that she had seen pastors and clergy persons come in and not answer those questions, and they're gone. Probably a great percentage of them didn't have to be gone. So I just appreciate, we're going to talk some more about the resources. Let me ask you this. When, and this can any of you, when you hear the diagnosis cancer, all right, so we're talking about, so already that's a very troubling thing to hear. And then you immediately begin to think about how you're going to pay for it, right? You think about, I don't have no insurance. I mean, and then that affects your spirit negatively. You cannot heal without a healthy spirit, right? So I'm just curious, when you got your diagnosis, and all of you can answer this, what were your immediate thoughts? What were your immediate thoughts? Or do you even remember what your thoughts were? Anybody? Reverend, let's start with you. You've been, wait.
I don't know I can't remember what my immediate thoughts were, but I do remember that it rocked my world, because I call myself going to get my examination and get my biopsy alone. I wasn't telling anybody anything, but after that biopsy, it rocked my world.
Wow.
And I afterward, when I began to open up and talk to people about it, I found I had this amazing, support system. I literally left out of the doctor's office and got in my car and called my brother. I was living in California at the time. My brother was living in Maryland. And I mean, he ripped me another hole. He cursed me out, something awful about it. Why would you go through something like that? But having been diagnosed with cancer, just the word cancer in your body, it just rocks your world, because all of us think that we grow up believing that once you have cancer, you're going to die, and it's this awful disease, and it can be, but modern medicine, has improved to the point where I have seen patients just take a pill once a day, once a week, and
right.
and I've seen them live, there's this lady I know that's been living like for at least 5 or 6 years with that diagnosis. I think that which is amazing, and I'm trying to think of something else I was getting ready to say, but yes, it rocked my world. But going back to something you said about therapy, so I have a shirt on that's called Hurdle, and Hurdle is a teletherapy, mental health organization, and we are intentional about culturally sensitive therapists, and this company trains their therapists to really minister to or to deal with African American and indigenous people. But you're talking about, when you said, our spirits, need to be, we need to be in tune with our spirits and stuff. But if our minds are not well, it's challenging to really deal with the spiritual aspect of us, and that's why I advocate for mental health, for treatment, to go see a therapist, because if your mind is sick, you can't really hear God properly. And
right.
So all of this that we're going through, our health issues, we need to be talking to a therapist, especially when we have these major health issues. And I wish we would get away from talking about mental health versus our physical health. It's health. It's health. It's one thing. Our mind if something's going on with our mind, something's going to happen within, your internal organs. If something has happened, with your heart and your bloodstream, your kidneys and your liver and everything, it's going to mess with your mind. It's going to mess with you mentally. Yeah, you may call out to God and everything, but, there needs to be, some coming together between the spirituality piece and the health piece to bring us to help to make us whole. And you can't do one without the other. You cannot be whole without that spiritual piece. You cannot, you need both of them, to join together.
Right. I appreciate that. You're absolutely right. Chris, what were your thoughts when you heard the diagnosis? Do you remember?
Well, I think I kind of blamed myself because I never really had insurance as an issue. I was always covered. And I thought about all of the times I had been to my doctor and he had encouraged me to get screenings and have things done, and I just put it off. And, so I was at least become responsible enough to go to the doctor at least once a year. But then when I got the diagnosis, I thought to myself, had I gone, a year ago when he told me to go, or had I gone 2 years ago when he told me to go, or 3 years ago. So I think in addition to the shock, because it was, as I mentioned, the first colonoscopy I'd ever had, and to get a diagnosis after having your first colonoscopy was very shocking. But I also felt a lot of kind of self-anger because I had had so many chances. I had all the insurance coverage that I needed to get as many screenings and get as many tests done as I could have possibly needed. But I just didn't think that there was a need for me to do those things. Specifically with colon cancer, I thought of that as an old man's disease. And just not something that was relevant to me. So I think in addition to the initial shock, it was also just kind of like the self-anger, because there were opportunities that I could have found out sooner and might not have had to go through the surgery. Had we just done a colonoscopy, they could have removed it as a polyp 5 years ago or 3 years ago, but I didn't do what I should have done. So that was kind of my initial reaction.
That's very interesting. I've often heard people talk about reactions they've had after the diagnosis. I don't think I have ever heard self-anger. But the way you're talking about it, it would make sense. Dag, if I had just, I can feel that, that you just, we put ourselves in situations, and then when we realize we've done it, then we're ticked off at ourselves, and it makes an impression.
Right, because I had the access.
Yeah.
I just didn't take advantage of it.
Yeah. Victoria, what was your immediate? So you've had this diagnosis 3 times. What have been your reactions?
You want my real? Can I give you my
Yeah,
honest answer?
I wanted cold-blooded.
Oh Lord, geez, I'm sorry, Proctor. But seriously, when I got diagnosed in 2012 with cancer, I was like, damn. And I was like Dr. Chris Wells, because I started self-shaming and loathing. I could have worked out better. I used to be a bodybuilder and I stopped. I could have, my diet was poor. I should have did this. I should have done that. And I could have did this. And it was a woulda, coulda, shoulda. And so that's what happened to me in 2012 until, some of my friends were like, why are you doing that? And talking to me and stuff like that. The second time I was like, damn, not again.
Wow.
But it's this third time. It's this third time when I'm a pastor, preacher, teacher, love God. I'm third generational preacher in my family, been around church, been in church all my life, choir director, praise and worship leader, all those lovely, lofty titles. But when I was told that I had cancer the third time, I went to a very, very dark place immediately. I was crying. Matter of fact, I took Bishop Allison Abrams was with me, and Bishop Bonnie Radden was on the phone as my advocates to go and hear what is going with me, because I was a nervous wreck. And when I sat there, tears were just falling. Tears were falling. They were asking the questions for me. And they were asking my oncologist. She was like, you didn't have to bring. I said, I brought people here who were going to advocate for me. Because the doctor didn't really want them sitting there. They're not going anywhere, right? And so to a very, very dark place immediately. Immediately, I went to a dark place, and I was there for about 6 weeks. I didn't want to hear no prayers. I didn't want to pray. I didn't want to hear from nobody telling me anything about, I didn't want nobody calling me with no doggone scripture saying, well, the Lord and all this others. I didn't want to hear none of that. But I was glad for my friends who allowed me to go to that place and not judge it.
Yes.
Right. And I've had a couple people in my life try to judge it. you're a woman of God. You know better. I said, I might be a doggone woman of God. But what does that have to do with my diagnosis? Even though I'm not my diagnosis, I am human and I'm having a real emotion. So please let me have my emotion without you interfering, because the God that I do serve is okay with me questioning her.
That's right.
Yes.
The God that I serve is okay with me being pissed off.
That's right.
Preach.
You know?
That's right.
So
That's
do
right.
not come with your theology or
Yes.
your holier than thou that you're a woman of God and you ought to know better, right? You know, Lee was talking about, Dr. Lee was talking about this whole notion of wholeness and wellness. And a lot of times we do that with these theological sayings, and we believe them for ourselves. And even myself was believing stuff because I've been in church all my life. I grew up Baptist, so y'all know how that is, and partly Pentecostal, or charismatic. And so you have all these theological sayings and stuff like that. And so, you know, it's this thing, Jesus said, do you want to be made whole? It's not just in the physical.
That's right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so, you know, I had a girlfriend said, you know, who's a lawyer and a pastor and a clinician, all three of those. And she had to go through, and she said, Vic, she cussed me out first. She said, look, get up off your ass and do this. She said, you have to know that you are differently able. I know some people may not like that, but she said, you are differently able, but you are still the same person. It's okay for you to have that. It's okay for you to be pissed and be mad and everything. But she said, you can't see life the way you used to see it.
That's right.
Because you're still well and you're still whole. Right. And she was helping me come out of that. Right. Because I was starting to think that I was different because I was sick, because people will come along. And can I say something here? I wish people would stop giving us stories about their family members and then tell us, but they died. If I have a stage 4 diagnosis, why do I want to hear about your family and then they died afterwards? If you're going to give me an experience, and tell me how they moved on with life.
And moved on.
If you don't tell me you don't look like you have cancer. These are some of the things I think people in this outside of illness should be, with a debilitating illness, should be mindful of. But I was pissed. I was pissed at God. I was pissed at the world. I was pissed at the medical industry. All these years, all this research, all this money, and we still got this stuff saying incurable disease. So yeah, I went to a dark place. I came out, then I was, back to myself. But I did go there, and I needed to go there because that's where I found my strength, was in my dark place.
Right.
Theologically, that may not make sense to some folks, but I found strength in the darkness.
It makes perfect sense. And I think that's part of the thing, the vice of theology that kills. I remember this young girl who had bone cancer, and she was terribly sick, and her mom was very, very religious, and she would call the saints over, and they would come over with the oil, to do the anointing and, lay on hands and do the speaking in tongues. And of course, she wasn't getting any better. And they finally told this girl, she was 17 years old, they said, you just don't have enough faith. When she told me that they said that to her, I was so, I was pissed. I was pissed. I thought, how can you do that? And she, so anyway, she was struggling with it, and she called me one night. She was crying, and they said, I don't have any faith. And I thought, how cruel is it? You who say you love Jesus, how cruel is it to put that burden on this baby and make her doubt her faith? So anyway, we had a conversation, and she ended up back in the hospital, and she was in horrific pain. And I was going to see her. She was in so much pain that even the sheets on her would hurt her body. The bone cancer was so bad. And so we could hear her screaming when you got off the elevator. So I was going this one day, and I got off, and I didn't hear her, and I got worried. I said, oh shoot, what's going on? When I went into her room, she was smiling. Now she had it bad. She had really bad. She looked bad. I mean, the tumors were like coming out everywhere. And she was smiling. She said, Reverend Sue, I heard from God. I heard from God. She said, those people were wrong. She said, I got strong faith. And she actually, it was such a testimony. So that theology that you don't have faith, and sometimes, you're not going to get well the way you want to get well. But you, Victoria, if you have a spirit that is healthy, you're able to navigate some of the most horrific and painful experiences possible. So I appreciate it. And I think it's good that you're talking about how pissed you were, because we don't talk about it. We want to act like we're so holy, and I don't think anybody's all that holy. That's just me, but I don't think you need to be that holy either. I think
Right.
God is as a big enough boy or a big enough deity for us to be exactly who we are. I
Can I
see you,
say
brother.
something?
You look like you got something to say.
Oh,
Oh, I'm
So,
sorry. Go ahead, Reverend Victoria. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say just one quick thing around that faith pole piece, because that's the first thing that most of us with a illness or a debilitating illness or a sickness get. And so my friend, Elder Dorothy, we were talking, and she talked about, this whole notion of straddling the fence around our faith, and that, but is it really a straddling of, just because I'm mad at God doesn't make me doubt my faith.
That's right.
And just because I have questions don't make me doubt my faith.
That's
Right.
right.
And so
Right.
we need to give people permission to go to wherever they need to go, because we have to understand everybody's journey, spiritual journey, is different. How I serve God and believe about God is going to be different. It's not traditional by any means, right? It's very liberal in the ways in which I see God and believe in God. And so if you just believe that because I'm starting to be sad and I'm crying, that it's like when we in church and we want to fan somebody because they're depressed or upset about something. Sometimes they're just tears of joy because they've been blessed in something. People celebrate differently. And so I just think that we need to be a little more sensitive in Christendom around this whole notion, of someone not having enough faith.
That's right.
Because they are pissed with God or mad or something like that. We just can't keep doing that.
Well, and I always tell people to read the Psalter, read all 150 Psalms. Just read them and see how many people are pissed off at God. I hope I'm not going to get in trouble, but pissed off at
Blame it on me. I started the word pissed.
That's okay,
Blame it on me.
it's like right up underneath the surface. It drives me crazy nuts that we walk around with this faux religion. I call FAUX, a faux religion. And I'm so good and I'm so holy and I never have any doubts. You have Christians who are grinning all the time. I just love the Lord and the Lord is so good. Yeah, see, and sometimes you don't feel like the Lord is all that good, and you need to be able to say that. So, and I think that you're being able to express that, Reverend Victoria. I am so appreciative of it. I don't think we need to be acting like everything's okay when everything's not okay. And
Right.
I think that is a part of the process that helps us to get our minds clear, like Reverend Lee's talking about, and our spirits cleaned out. You got to get that stuff out, because otherwise it builds up. It's like plaque on your teeth, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
becomes plaque on your spirit, and
That's
it
good.
clogs you up. So I appreciate it. I hope I'm not out, in trouble, but I'm so glad you gave me permission to say what I've been feeling anyway. Reverend Lee,
I did.
Yeah, you did. I love it. Thank you very
I
much.
did.
Reverend Lee, you look like you were going to
So
say something.
absolutely, you're not in trouble, because again, I appreciate the fact that Reverend Victoria was sharing that, because that's what I talk about all the time. Look at the books of Psalms. Look at Lamentations, and there are other stories where you get mad at God, and you said it very well when you said that begins the mental health issue. Because and people put us in a box and put us in a place where we cannot be honest with ourselves, and like especially clergy, we're superhuman,
Right.
and we don't have feelings, and we don't have those emotions, and we're not supposed to feel those things, and we're supposed to be joyous all the time, and that is a lie from the pit of hell. And we need to talk and holler and scream,
Right.
and say, I'm in pain, I don't like this, but but it's healthy, because to me it begins the healthy dialogue that we need with God,
Right.
and telling him I'm mad about this thing. I had one of my seminary professors tell me that he cursed God out one time. I said, look, now I can go along with being mad with God, but we ain't cussing God out. But it's okay
Why
to
not?
express yourself, and then talk about how angry you are. And it's a release mechanism. But to me, you begin to open up, and then the Holy Spirit can come in and begin to minister to you. But if you are denying the way you feel, if you compact those emotions down, and it becomes a hardened surface, like you use the metaphor of plaque on your teeth. And you know how when you have so much plaque on your teeth, the dentist has to come and start scraping, and that's painful.
Right.
So
It is.
the Spirit of God cannot come in and penetrate, you know,
Right.
like God wants to minister to us. And so we do have to allow our loved ones and allow each other to sit in those dark places for a while, because it's in the darkness, it's in the valleys,
That's right.
you know, that God begins to create the character that he has placed within us. Without those deep, dark experiences, the character that he has placed within us cannot evolve. They cannot come out. I have a godfather here who and he has cancer. I know at least 3 different types of cancer, and he is a true man of God. But I call him the Sunday school preacher. And he, you know, when he first got diagnosed, I could tell he was really angry with God. And I tried to talk to him to let him know that it's okay to be angry with God. And he just wasn't accepting it. And one day I heard Howard John Wesley of the Alpha Street Baptist Church preach a sermon on it's okay to be angry with God.
It's okay.
That's it. So I called him up and said, we're going for a ride. And he, you know, we got in the car with me, and I said, I want you to, we went and parked in this park. I said, I want you to listen to this. And he broke that thing down so well that it rejuvenated him.
Yeah.
It gave him permission. And so this is 2 years later when doctors had, you know, basically said he wasn't going to live that long. And that man is, although he is still sick and his cancers are incurable, he has fought the good fight. And he's still alive today, and he's still talking about Jesus. But that message about it's okay to be angry with God changed his life. And I know it gave him the fight that he needed to continue on. And 2 years later, he's still alive. He was able
As
to
you're
celebrate
talking, I'm thinking of that.
his wedding anniversary this past Friday.
Come on now. See, as you're talking, I'm thinking that Chadwick Boseman must have had times when he was super angry at God.
Absolutely.
And expressed it. And I think that's why he was able to work as he did, even through the most difficult times of his disease, because being able to get the plaque off your spirit, just get it off.
Yes.
So that you can have a real relationship, a real conduit between yourself and God, spirit to spirit, that just makes you breathe easier, it helps you sleep at night, it helps you to put things in perspective. And as you're talking, Reverend Lee, I'm thinking I'm sure he had some conversations with God. What's up with this? It's like sometimes things happen in your life when you get older, things happen. You can go to bed and feel okay, and then get up in the morning, something's wrong. So, well, what is that? So when things happen and you're not expecting them, it makes you question, but you're supposed to question. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, Mama and them said, don't question God, but the psalmists question God. All of the time, they turn, and even Jesus, the Christ, questioned God. Said, "Man, what you doing? What you doing? I mean, what is this necessary?" So,
questions always give us permission, and we need to give ourselves permission to have these questions, because questions open up conversation with God, with others, and with ourselves. And if we don't give ourselves permission to ask these questions, even angry, we won't be able to develop our way out of it or move forward. We need to give ourselves permission, and we need to, and Dr. Lee said it, and you're saying it, Dr. Sue, we need to also be mindful of I want to go back to what is wholeness and what is wellness to us.
Right.
And when Jesus said, do you want to be made whole? You cannot just look at the physical. You have to look at the whole aspect of everything. The mind is the seat of the soul. So we have to look at everything, our soulish self, our spiritual self, our crazy self, our happy self. We have to look at everything and give ourselves permission to be painfully mad.
That's right. So we're going into our last half hour, but I really want to talk about resources, because here's the thing. So many churches cannot afford to give their pastors health care. They can't pay for it, which I think is a travesty. I think it's a travesty. We had this in another conversation, how denominations require that you go to seminary, you got all these bills, and you get a job in the church and you don't make enough money, halfway to pay your mortgage or your rent, much less, do anything else. And these churches are so small that they can't afford healthcare. And it's to me, it's just a travesty. The overall cancer death rate in Black men It was 19% higher than white men during the period of 2015 to 2019. Specifically, Black men had double the risk of dying from multiple myeloma and prostate cancer, and almost 3 times the risk of dying from stomach cancer compared to white men. When you have statistics like that, you need to have some health care. The most commonly diagnosed cancers among Black men are prostate, which is like 37%, lung cancer, about 12%, and then colon and rectal cancer. Among Black women, the most commonly diagnosed cancers are breast cancer with 32%, and lung cancer at 11%, and colorectal cancer at 9%. As a whole, Black people are more likely to die from most cancers that are fixable, that are curable, that are treatable, that we're more likely to die from most cancers and live the shortest amount of time after a cancer diagnosis, many times because we can't afford healthcare. And for clergy not to be able to afford healthcare, I think just, talking about being mad at God, if you're a clergy person, you're trying to do the pastor role and you get cancer and you can't pay for your treatment, that has to produce some anger. So, and talking with Reverend Victoria, and she said there's money out there, and I don't think we know. And she shared some of that there is money out there, and I was so curious because I didn't know that, Reverend Victoria. I really did not know that, and so I started looking stuff up. And Reverend Lee, you probably know all about this. Chris, you might know about this. I didn't know about it. It's called Health Reimbursement Arrangement, HRAs, and each state has their own structure for these HRAs. But what it is that it's a customizable option for pastors and ministers, and it is a health reimbursement arrangement. It's an IRS approved health benefit used to reimburse employees for out-of-pocket medical expenses and individual health insurance premiums. Boy, that was like, I didn't know that. Did y'all know that? Did you know that? I didn't know about that. There's 2 common types of HRAs. One's for a qualified small employer and one is for individual coverage. I didn't know that either. I mean, I think all of us should know this stuff. So when we get the diagnosis, or if we get the diagnosis, instead of saying there and freezing and going into a panic because you don't know how you're going to pay for it, if you go in the hospital, who's going to pay the mortgage, who's going to pay for the kid, all of those things make your illness worse. But if we could get the information out that there are resources that you can go to, and it's called HRA, but at the end of the day, they probably do call it Medicaid, Reverend Victoria. What they do is the HRA, in this reimbursement process, what they do is the organization that's doing it sets a monthly allowance of tax-free money that they'll offer to their eligible employees, or tax-free money that you can draw and as an individual. Employees purchase health insurance policy and healthcare essentials that work best for them. So I'm saying all this, I'm not going to do it all because we only have a few minutes left, really. But to know that this thing exists, you could take this knowledge or information about health reimbursement arrangements to your board of trustees or to your deacon board or something, and set up something so the church that cannot afford to pay for you can get into an arrangement with one of these companies and help make a way for you to be able to pay for your care. And there are other there are all kinds of these organizations. I didn't know it. There's some that are, you got to kind of be very just use your, think about what you're getting into, because there are some of these organizations or these arrangements are done by evangelical religious organizations, and they won't let you, if you won't get money if you smoke or you drink or you believe in abortion and all. I was just stunned to read all of that. Absolutely. So if they don't know that you do all that, and then you get sick and they find out, they ask you a question, and do you believe in abortion? And you say yes, they can turn you down, and they do. So you have to be very circumspect. That's the word I'm talking. And really do some research. And I would say that we should all do some research before we ever have to do it.
Right.
Go ahead.
I think that you brought up something and it provoked an idea in me, which I've been thinking about today anyway, is that we need to come together as churches, and because some churches have a lot of gifted and people in their congregation. And there are other churches who, really don't have the gifting and the people who are able to do the research that we're talking about. And we need to, educate ourselves and began to go around various churches and conferences and church conferences and talk about health and be more intentional about it. And that's one of the things that we need to include in that is how do we pay for this and educate our community as far as the grants that are available. What does the government have to offer? I was talking to a friend of mine, today, and they were telling me how that there is money there that they're waiting, that the U.S. government is sitting on for mental health, but nobody's coming to get it. And so I will be on a journey, to have, more in-depth conversations with my friend to figure out how can, we get this money, because you're talking about something that's needed right now is mental health for our kids and for our younger people, in the light of what happened at UVA. And a lot of a statistic that we do not know, most of us probably do not know exists, is the fastest growing suicide rate in America today is African American boys. Teenage boys. And so we need to deal with that. So we need to come together and begin to do this research and find out where the money is and bring it together and go around and educate our community and our people.
Can I add it one more thing? Particularly for smaller churches, what can be done also are two things. One, when I was transitioning from insurance, no insurance, whatever, and it was too high for the church. My wife at the time I was being covered on her insurance because she worked for the government. Then the church would reimburse her, talking about reimbursement program. But we also could find caretakers. Everybody who's been diagnosed with anything should have a caretaker anyway. So if smaller churches, it could be your caretakers, whoever your caretaker is, and you get on that caretaker's insurance and the church can reimburse them if they have good insurance. It might be $70 a month. It might be $150 a month, but at least it won't be, COBRA prices where it's $600 and $700 a month, right? So we have to be mindful strategically of things that we can do as smaller churches, is have a caretaker, and then the caretaker can get on that caretaker's insurance. It could be a member of the church, it could be a family member, and then they can be reimbursed by the smaller church, for pastors is what I'm talking about.
Right.
So we need to think about that.
That's something that I didn't know. And that's why we need to come together and have conversations like this and begin to create a manuscript, a book, a resource that we can always go to. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Office of Clergy and Leadership Resource Development is part of what we do is create resources and this is a resource that I think is really needed if we could get this information out, because we just don't know. I mean, not just when it comes to healthcare, but there's so much money out there that's just kind of sitting around. We don't know about it. And I know, and y'all know that, post-COVID, all these corporations and organizations made buku money, and they're trying to find places to give it away. And so we need to know what those sources are and be able to develop some resources around so that we can help our own people. And I think that this HRA thing, I'm going to look into it. I mean, I just really want to look into it and make it more clear for everybody, because if you can get into one of those with a small church and then and it becomes a win-win situation, so that the church can be a part of this, and then you're being reimbursed by the church that's getting money from another source to help you with this. You save your life, you save your life. I call that act of faith. I don't think that, I think that's an act of faith. And I think that's a healthy faith as opposed to a sitting on the dock of the bay faith, where you just kind of just sitting there waiting for God to do something. No. God gives us the wherewithal and the equipment to do well, or do better than we thought we could do. And so when I read, and I'm reading it, there is a website, guys. It's called peoplekeep.com. Peoplekeep.com. where it explains this HRA thing. And there are other sites as well, but I think everybody should write that down, and people should go to that site, in your spare time and look at it and read it and get to know it and figure out, if you are in a church where you don't have health care, figure out how you can make that work for you and for your church, and thereby equip yourself. God is an equipper. The Dolores Williams, who just passed, talked about how God didn't keep Hagar out of her situation, but God helped her to be able to survive, right? Survive and live. And I think that's what God does. God doesn't keep the bad things from happening, right? We wish God would, but God doesn't. But God gives us the capacity to do some things for ourselves that are going to strengthen us for the journey. And so, again, that website is called peoplekeep.com. And what will happen is, I think what I'll do is do some more research on that and find some more sites, and we'll post them on the Samuel DeWitt Proctor website. But we're also going to be, after the conference, we're going to be working to develop some resources. Let me just be real, but develop some resources to put on our website that can be available and accessible to everybody. None of us know, the day or the hour. We don't know when we're going to need something. And you might have health insurance today and might not have it when you need it. Right. So I think that this is a really good resource. So if I were to ask you, because we're winding down, what has been the value of this conversation for each of you? Start with Chris, and then Reverend Victoria, and then Reverend Lee. What has been the value of this conversation?
Well, for me, hearing everyone's journey and their personal story, I think it provides a perspective for me to know that God has worked in each of our lives in different ways. But I think the common thread is that, it's faith that really keeps the mental and the physical wellness that we talked about earlier. I think faith is definitely woven into that and bringing those together. So I think that's kind of the hearing the combined stories is kind of where my takeaway from our conversation today.
That's great. Reverend Victoria.
Pretty much the same thing. I hate to be redundant what Dr. Wells said, but mainly listening to the journeys, knowing that I'm not alone, be it male, female, trans people, persons. It just makes me know that it's okay to be me while on this journey, right? Not that I'm looking for approval, but it still is okay to be me, whether I'm mad, whether I question God, and that I'm happy to hear the stories. And I think about a book that also helps me from Dr. Gould, The Gospel According to Cancer. And it's a really, really good book. And you don't have to have cancer to read her book, because she's a theologian, she's a scholar, she's a pastor, she's a teacher, professor. And I wasn't going to read it. And Dr. Ayo sent it to me I met Ayo at the Black Church Summit, and she sent that book to me. And I didn't want another book about cancer, but I opened that page and it says, I might be strong, I might be resistant, but pretty much, damn it, I got cancer, right? And so that book allowed me to be me. This conversation allows me to be me. And I just move forward in it. And I'm not my diagnosis. So I
love that. We need to make a sweatshirt, y'all, that says I'm not my diagnosis. That, what? I'm always telling Dr. I, but people will say these things. Oh, that needs to be a sweatshirt, but that needs to be a sweatshirt right there. Mm-hmm. Sure does. Mm-hmm. Dr. Lee, what are you taking away from this conversation?
I don't know that I can add, anything that from Dr. Wells or Dr. Victoria has said about, coming, what I'm taking away from this. It made me realize, it emphasized what I've already felt, and I've already known that these conversations need to become the norm.
Yeah.
And it helps. The more we talk about it, the freer, we become, the more knowledgeable we become. We learn the more by having these conversations. And I have learned, a great deal, in hearing the stories and resources, and it encourages me to want to really go out and dig deeper and educate myself that much more, and to build something to go out into our community, because our community is hurting. We are hurting people, and we've been hurting too long, and do something to give our community hope. Not just words, but hope. And hope is beyond words. And finding out where the money is and where the resources are, and to help people, because that's when they see us helping other people, that's when they get hope. Because it's time out for just the verbiage. We have to put actions behind our words.
That is so powerful. If I link what you just said, what we've been talking about, to the current political situation where, I think the tyrannists, is that a word? Tyrannists, how they operate is to try to erase and extinguish hope in all areas. It's just not going to be, and I think what this conversation is showing me and feeding me is the truth that hope is just the most powerful thing that we can have. That's why they work so hard to take it away. But if you can get a diagnosis, go and be mad, be sad, be depressed, go to a dark space, cry, pout, and all that kind of stuff, and then after a while, and let's call it the third day, get up, right? But after that period of time, I'm finna do this. I'm going to do this, and your spirit then becomes your driver, and your spirit says to your illness. We're talking about cancer, but it could be any illness. Your spirit says to the illness, "You ain't the boss of me." How about that?
Right.
You are not the boss of me. And when we have that attitude, when we say, I don't have to bow to this illness. I don't have to give in to this illness. I don't have to walk in fear of this illness. What I have to do is walk with my head up and with all the hope that I can get, and I'm going to be all right for whatever that looks like. I'm going to be all right. And I think that, I don't know, you guys just inspire me. This has been so fun. I am so grateful. I hope I haven't missed questions, because I'd be missing questions in the chat. But this has just been so fun and so informative. And I want to thank all of you. You've been so good. You've been so open and transparent and honest. And it's been a feeding. And that's what we want these conversations to be. So I just want to thank you. Oh my goodness, I feel so good. We're getting ready to leave, but I don't want to leave without saying to everybody who's listening that we hope to see you at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor conference in February. In Atlanta. This is our 20th year of existence, and we want to see you there. We want you to come. We want you to bring your friends, bring your mama, bring whomever you think you can get there. Bring and celebrate this organization that works so hard to give people hope and to give people the strength to fight against not only the diseases of the society, but the diseases in our hearts too. When you leave that place, you got some hope for yourself, and it is so powerful in our lives. So again, I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody who has been listening. I hope that you will come back for our next clergy conversation. We have them every fourth Monday of the month. That means it'll be the last Monday of December when we meet again. And we want to, if you have ideas of things that you want to talk about, if you shoot us an email, you can email me at susan@sdpconference.info, and we will work on that. But we're also going to be working on developing some resources, so we have the answers that we need when stuff happens, or if stuff happens. We don't have to feel helpless, because we're not helpless. And we've got this thing, this gift, this power called hope that has kept all of y'all going. That's for sure. If you didn't have that hope, you wouldn't be here tonight. So I just want to thank you. And to everybody else, thank you for being here. Have a really good evening and take good care. Bye-bye.